15. Andre Young. In October 2017, a 52-year-old Ohio man named Andre Young attempted to rob a Speedway gas station in Cincinnati. He allegedly approached the cashier with a box cutter in hand and said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," as he tried to jump over the counter. The cashier decked Young in the face and knocked him unconscious, giving the worker a chance to take the box cutter and dial 911. During the call, the employee could be heard telling the dispatcher that Young was still knocked out and for emergency responders to hurry to the scene. Upon regaining consciousness, Young allegedly tried claiming that he'd come into the store to buy a beer and that he was using the box cutter to scrape something off his shirt, but he eventually admitted that he was being drunk and foolish. He was arrested for aggravated robbery and assault. Young attended his first court hearing on crutches and with a fresh black eye from the cashier, making it clear that he had messed with the wrong person. 12 years earlier, in 2005, he had entered the same gas station with a baseball bat and tried to rob the store. He was convicted in the case and also had 5 other felonies on his record at the time of his most recent arrest. According to state records, Young is currently serving a 6-year sentence for aggravated robbery. He became eligible for parole in 2023, but remains behind bars for now. 14. Curtis Sanders. A convenience store clerk in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was likely terrified when a masked thief entered the business in October 2016 and tried to rob the cash register at gunpoint. Later identified as 30-year-old Curtis Sanders, the suspect ordered the cashier to hand over all the money from the till. Instead of doing as he was told, the worker reached for his own gun. Sanders fired the first shot, which struck the employee in the face, but the clerk shot back multiple times, prompting the wannabe robber to flee the scene empty-handed. Luckily, neither of the men's injuries were life-threatening. After receiving treatment at a hospital for his injuries, Sanders was booked into custody on felony charges of armed robbery, attempted murder, and being a felon in possession of a weapon. He'd already served 5 years in prison for previous burglary and grand theft convictions. Records show that he's currently serving a 15-year sentence for attempted robbery with a gun or deadly weapon and attempted murder. 13. Gas thief goes up in flames. In what can perhaps be best described as an uncanny dose of instant karma, a Utah man caught fire in 2022 while siphoning gas from a truck's fuel tank. Surveillance footage shows the moment the thief caught fire while crawling beneath the vehicle he was trying to steal from. The incident happened outside of a business called Summit Fire and Protection. Afterward, branch manager Travis Mills told local station KSL-TV that some people tried to take the easy way out of everything. He was alerted to the theft shortly before the truck became fully engulfed in flames. Mills explained that when the culprit failed to siphon gas the good old-fashioned way, he drilled a hole in the tank, which caused the blaze to break out. These type of robberies are reportedly on the rise, as gas prices in the US hit all-time highs. In fact, the attempted robbery was caught on camera thanks to a $30,000 surveillance system that Mills had just installed on the property due to the increase in gas thefts. Shortly before the theft that was captured by the new system, someone stole the truck's catalytic converter and siphoned gasoline from the tank. The footage shows the thief maneuvering beneath the truck and then jumping and trying to put out the flames on his shirt. In accordance with the basic rules of fire safety that we all learn in elementary school, he can then be seen dropping and rolling before being helped into a getaway vehicle by an accomplice. It's unclear if he was injured, and if so, how severe his injuries were. The thieves remain at large. 12. Racist gets what he deserves. During the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic back in 2020, a grey-haired man targeted a man of South Asian descent with a derogatory insult in East London. The incident occurred outside the East London mosque, where the victim pulled out his phone and began recording the interaction. Shocked by what the rude man had just said, the victim asked him to confirm that he'd really just called him a certain name. The bigoted middle-aged grump verified that he had, in fact, used that word and said, "because you are." A brief verbal altercation ensued as the man filming the conversation called the older gentleman a effing waste. The man snapped back saying, "No, you're the waste," and insulted the victim's clothing. For a brief moment, the camera went out of view. When it refocused, the grey-haired bully was lying on the ground. The South Asian man had apparently gotten frustrated enough to knock the stranger over. He shared the video on social media, making it clear that he believed the ill-mannered racist had gotten a taste of what he deserved. 11. Joseph Madzanowski. Chicago has a troubling legacy of police corruption, and it doesn't seem like the problem's going to go away anytime soon. In 2022, a study of 30,000 members of law enforcement who served the city over a 50-year period estimated that roughly 4% of the officers were members of informal crooked cop gangs. Given these efforts, it would take some serious effort for someone to become the most corrupt cop in Chicago's history. That title currently belongs to Joseph Madzanowski, whose history of on-the-job crime dates back to the early 1980s. For 15 or more years, he committed racketeering schemes and other crimes right under the nose of his employer, while maintaining the false image of a dedicated lawman. Madzanowski was praised for his high number of drug and gun busts, which ranked him as one of the most highly respected members of the department's gang crimes unit. Even federal agents were vying to work with him due to his high success rate. In reality, Madzanowski was a drug and weapons dealer himself. In addition to selling crack cocaine and ammunition, he conducted business with gang members, provided guns to his underworld allies, extorted protection money from drug organizations, and revealed confidential information to his criminal associates, including the identities of informants and undercover cops. On several occasions, Madzanowski attacked and assaulted victims without provocation. In 1983, he forced his way into the apartment of a man named Andrei Koshaba and proceeded to beat and threaten the victim at gunpoint. The following year, he brutally assaulted a reverend in public while on duty. Yet he managed to get away with it because the department's policies were structured in a way that favored and protected abusive cops. Over the years, numerous people filed complaints against Madzanowski for brutality, harassment, and other abuses of power, and the city paid out an estimated $100,000 in law settlements to his victims. But his higher-ups repeatedly turned a blind eye to his behavior, and the morally bankrupt detective was consistently cleared by internal investigators. And while the gang crime unit that Madzanowski led was considered an elite squad on its surface, nearly every member of it was rotten in one way or another. As his involvement with shady and powerful characters deepened, Madzanowski's crimes escalated. When he was finally arrested in 1998, he'd essentially become a drug kingpin, moving hundreds of pounds of cocaine between Chicago and Miami. The true extent of Madzanowski's crimes will probably never be known. When he was finally busted by the feds, he was arrested alongside 11 alleged co-conspirators, many of whom took plea deals and cooperated with the authorities in exchange for leniency. In 2003, Madzanowski was convicted of 10 federal counts, including wire fraud, conspiring to participate in racketeering activity, conspiring to commit extortion, possessing, conspiring to distribute and selling drugs, and various weapon charges. It's admittedly rare for someone who's not a convicted killer to receive a life sentence without parole. But there are exceptions, including Madzanowski, who was ordered to spend the rest of his days behind bars due to the severity of his crimes. In 2020, he tried to get his sentence reduced under the First Step Act, which was signed into law by former President Donald Trump in 2018. The new policy is aimed at reforming the federal prison system by taking steps to reduce recidivism and giving more offenders a second chance at freedom. A federal judge rejected the request after concluding that Madzanowski remains a danger to society and is not a good candidate for the program. 10. Brandon Climer and Savannah King. Stealing is a dumb thing to do in any context, but to do it without a reliable getaway vehicle is an even worse idea. 30-year-old Brandon Climer and 20-year-old Savannah King learned this lesson the hard way in March of 2021, when their car stalled across the street from a Walmart store they'd just shoplifted a cart full of merchandise from in Woodland, California. By the time the couple's clunker broke down, police were already en route to the scene. Employees had seen Climer and King fleeing out an emergency exit and dialed 911. Unaware that the couple were suspected of stealing and trying to get away from the scene, a good Samaritan helped the pair push their car down the street. But they were still stranded, and police found them sitting in the vehicle with all the stolen items, which were returned to Walmart. King received a shoplifting citation, while Climer was booked into custody on 2 outstanding warrants and a shoplifting charge. The car was towed from the scene for what police described as a variety of reasons. While the outcome of the case is unclear, neither of the suspects appear to currently be in custody. 9. Kevin Rios. Like many narcissistic criminal defendants, Kevin Rios walked into a New York City courtroom with an arrogant smirk on his face when he appeared for sentencing in 2010 for a brutal attack on a prostitute. But he was quick to turn on the waterworks when he was given an opportunity to plead with the judge for leniency. Throughout the trial, the victim testified that Rios bragged about how he would never get caught for the crime because nobody cared about her. The woman provided a horrifying account of the extreme violence she suffered at the hands of Rios and another man who assaulted and robbed her at gunpoint. Through tears, Rios droned to the judge about how he was a changed man and expressed deep remorse for his crimes, stating in his own words, "I don't know what I'd do if that was my sister." He also claimed that he had dreams of someday helping children and working in a clothing store. Prosecutors accused Rios of failing to see the woman as a legitimate victim because she was a prostitute. When he wasn't in a courtroom begging for his freedom, he seemed unbothered about the fact that he'd made the victim fear for her life. At the time, Rios was already serving 15 years to life for another attack. It wasn't until he was arrested for the other incident that he was connected through the assault against the escort through DNA evidence. Needless to say, the judge was unswayed by the defendant's crocodile tears. He admonished Rios for trying to claim that the acts were consensual and sentenced him to 12 years in prison. 8. Ethan Thomas. A home intruder in San Antonio, Texas, was attempting to burglarize a residence in October 2023 when police showed up at the scene. The homeowner, Irvin Armstrong, was in the process of moving to Corpus Christi and was no longer living at the house. His home surveillance system alerted him to the presence of a man and a woman who had forced their way inside through a back entrance, and he called the cops. Later identified as 33-year-old Ethan Thomas, the man attempted to hide on some rafters in the attic, but he slipped off his perch, fell 2 stories, and got stuck between the chimney and a wall. Unable to escape on his own, Thomas had to ask for help from the very people he'd been trying to hide from just moments earlier. The police had to remove some of the home's siding in order to free Thomas, who was arrested for burglary and evading arrest. His female accomplice fled the scene and was still at large according to the most recent update on the case. Armstrong told local station Ken S5 that the burglars trashed his house and stole a bunch of things, but he said he wasn't mad about any of it, including the damages that were caused to the house in the process of freeing Thomas. While explaining how Thomas got stuck, he laughed and said, "So, anyway, karma." On a more serious note, he was glad nobody was hurt and thankful to the police for their swift response to his call. 7. Jeff Doucette. A devoted parent would do anything to protect their child and to ensure that justice is served when the unthinkable happens. But most people understand that unless they want to risk prison time, certain matters are best left in the hands of the court. A father from Louisiana named Gary Plauché decided to take the law into his own hands in 1984 when his son Jody was abducted by his karate instructor. Police traced Jody's whereabouts to a motel in Anaheim, California, after his kidnapper Jeff Doucette allowed him to call his mother. Jody was reunited with his family and Doucette was arrested. When Gary learned the horrifying details of Doucette's crimes, however, he felt both helpless and obligated to take care of the problem in a way that he saw fit. In Gary's mind, there was no reason to put Doucette through a trial, which would give him a chance to fight for his freedom and possibly receive a far lighter punishment than he deserved. On the day Doucette was extradited to Louisiana, Gary went to the airport with a loaded gun and stood among the throng of news crews who had also gathered in anticipation of Doucette's arrival. As Doucette walked past while being escorted by members of law enforcement, Gary pulled out his pistol and shot him in the head at point-blank range. Police officers immediately restrained Gary and could be heard asking him why Gary why after they recognized him as Jody's father. The vigilante execution was captured by news cameras and broadcast on live television, and Doucette died from his injuries the following day. Gary was initially charged with second-degree murder, but took a deal and pleaded no contest to manslaughter. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation in lieu of a 7-year suspended prison term, sparing him from any time behind bars as long as he avoided any further legal trouble. The lenient sentence was offered after psychiatrists testified that Gary entered a temporary state of insanity after discovering the extent of Ducote's abuse. According to experts, he was so overcome with emotion that he lost his ability to differentiate between right and wrong. And while Gary did not do the right thing in the eyes of the law, many people sympathized with the anguish that drove him to kill. During an interview in 2011, he said he did not regret his decision one bit and that he'd do it again. During an interview with the US Mirror in early 2024, Jody revealed that he's thriving. In the 40 years since the kidnapping, he's dedicated his life to raising awareness about predators and advocating for survivors. He also worked through his own trauma so that he could go on with his best life, which is what he's doing today. 6. Joseph McKinnon. A South Carolina man had just murdered his partner and was in the middle of burying her remains in 2022 when he suddenly collapsed and became unresponsive. Residents called the Edgefield County Sheriff's Office in May and reported seeing a man lying on the ground unconscious in the town of Trenton. Responding deputies found Joseph Anthony McKinnon dead in the yard of a home. While investigating the scene, they discovered the body of his girlfriend, 65-year-old Patricia Ruth Dent, wrapped in garbage bags and placed in a freshly dug hole. Neighbors told law enforcement that they'd seen McKinnon digging the hole the day before, and an autopsy determined that it died from a heart attack. An autopsy of Dent's remains concluded that she'd been strangled to death. Based on the evidence at the scene, it appeared as though McKinnon was almost finished filling Dent's grave when he set the shovel down and walked away. He then fell to the ground and apparently never regained consciousness. 5. Lena Hernandez. After a several-month period starting in October 2019, a 50-something Southern California woman named Lena Hernandez repeatedly made news headlines for going on racist tirades in public. Dubbed the SoCal Karen, the retired social worker's first arrest came after an outburst at a mall in Torrance, where she allegedly harassed a custodian and attacked an Asian American woman. Hernandez was charged with battery, and while getting in trouble with the law is enough to put some people on their best behavior, the explosive tantrums continued happening. In June of 2020, she was accused of targeting Asian Americans in 2 separate profanity-laden rampages, both of which were captured on video. During one of the confrontations, Hernandez could be heard telling a young woman who was trying to exercise to go back to whatever expletive Asian country you belong in. In the other encounter, she spoke in a mock Chinese accent and hurled racial slurs at a man of Asian descent. Police said there wasn't enough evidence to charge her in the more recent incidents, but the battery charge stuck. After pleading no contest, Hernandez was sentenced to 47 days in jail, 3 years of probation, and anger management classes. She was also ordered to stay away from the shopping mall and the victim, Kaiselin Salminyao, who told ABC7 that she was disappointed with what seemed like a light sentence. Salminyao had urged the judge to reject a plea deal that had been offered to Hernandez, but the request went unfulfilled. She later said that she felt like the court imposed the bare minimum punishment, and that it seemed to reflect a lack of value being placed on the safety of the Asian community. Her anger is understandable, especially since Hernandez was accused of spewing racist statements in multiple incidents. To make the situation even more infuriating, Hernandez returned to court a few months later and asked the judge to reduce her punishment. She said she couldn't afford to pay for the anger management classes she was required to attend, so the judge instead sentenced her to 80 hours of community service. He also shortened her probation from 3 years to 1 year, effectively slashing her obligations to society down to less than half of what the original sentence entailed. And while the outcome of the case is disappointing, the embarrassing videos of Hernandez will continue to follow her around, ensuring that she'll at least be held accountable in the court of public law. 4. Jesse Lee Harold. A Virginia man named Jesse Lee Harold had so many kids that authorities in Shenandoah County seemed to have lost count by the time he landed in court on a child endangerment case in 2014. At the time, Harold was 27 years old and was thought to be the father of 7 or 8 children by 6 women. In this particular case, he was accused of fleeing the scene of a hit-and-run on foot with a 3-year-old boy in his care. But he was no stranger to law enforcement, with previous convictions for past hit-and-runs, unlawful wounding, and drug-related charges. As part of a plea deal in the 2014 case, Harold was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with more than 2 years suspended, followed by 5 years of probation. He also agreed to get a vasectomy within a year of his release from prison, and to not get a reversal until he was finished with probation. The agreement specifically noted that this is an unusual stipulation for authorities to impose, and that it stemmed from prosecutors' concerns over Harold's proclivity to reproduce. There was also a disclaimer about how the unusual rule would not have been imposed if Harold did not agree to it, but he was willing to get the procedure and foot the bill for it. Even though Harold consented to the terms of the plea agreement, the vasectomy requirement was controversial due to Virginia's history of forcibly sterilizing mentally ill and physically handicapped people. Additionally, many critics found it ethically questionable for the justice system to ask a person to undergo a life-altering procedure, especially as the most generous option for reducing their time behind bars. Assistant Commonwealth's attorney Ilona White told the Washington Post that after reading the man's paperwork, she truly felt it was in the state's best interest for him to stop procreating until or unless he got his life together. It was a difficult decision for Harold to make, according to his defense attorney Charles Ramsey, who said that his client agreed to the unconventional stipulation for the sake of serving his time and getting home to his family as soon as possible. After his release, he continued getting into trouble with the law, so perhaps it really was for the best. In 2021, Harold was sentenced to up to 17 months in jail for leading police on a high-speed chase at speeds of more than 100 miles per hour. In early 2023, authorities asked the public for help finding the repeat felon, who was wanted on gun and drug charges. State records show that he's currently in state custody, with a projected release date in September 2025. And based on his history as a frequent flyer in the prison system, this probably won't be his last stint behind bars. 3. Conor Vincent Del Monte. Nobody seems to know exactly when a man they knew as Johnny Williams arrived in Puerto Rico. At some point over the last decade, he settled down in a rural mountain community on the eastern side of the island, near the El Yunque rainforest. The unassuming and admittedly handsome gentleman quickly made friends in his working-class neighborhood, where he volunteered with a local nonprofit and organized charity events for the needy. Nicknamed Johnny Teeth for his perfect pearly whites, he was known among locals for his magnetic charisma and his seemingly effortless ability to draw people to him. During Christmas time, Johnny ran a toy drive to ensure that none of the children in the community went without presents. He was also a regular at a monthly farmers market, where he helped his friends sell their wares, and was recognized by Puerto Rico's agriculture secretary for his efforts to save honeybees after Hurricane Maria. Williams was liked by practically everyone he crossed paths with. He even made friends with the island's richest and most famous residents. And while some people noticed that he didn't like to have his photo taken, he didn't seem to be hiding any deep dark secrets, but they couldn't have been more wrong. The man people knew as Johnny Williams was actually Conor Vincent de Monte, a 44-year-old wanted fugitive from Canada who'd been on the run for over a decade and was considered armed and dangerous by the authorities. He led one of British Columbia's most notorious gangs, the United Nations, and is suspected of killing a rival gang member at a Vancouver strip mall back in 2009. De Monte also stands accused of conspiring to murder 2 other rivals from an enemy group known as the Bacon Brothers. During his time as the United Nations gang's leader, De Monte allegedly trafficked copious amounts of drugs across international borders, including the famous BC Bud marijuana strain. The gang imported around 100 kilos of cocaine every month and communicated with one another using a custom encrypted phone service that they paid someone to set up so the police couldn't tap it. In addition to their drug trafficking activities, the criminal organization imported illegal guns. De Monte was last seen in Canada in 2011. Before heading to Puerto Rico, he spent time in Spain and Ireland, where he obtained a fake passport. And because he's smarter than the average person, he knew better than to do things that would tip off the police to his whereabouts. Every year, on his daughter's birthday, investigators listened in, hoping he'd slip up and call her, which would give away his location. But De Monte knew better, much to the frustration of law enforcement. If he did reach out to his daughter on her birthday, he did it in some other way, and he made sure it wasn't traceable. There were no reported sightings of DeMonte between 2013, when he was seen in Ireland, and 2022, when the authorities tracked him down in Puerto Rico. The authorities offered a $100,000 reward in exchange for information on his whereabouts, but nobody came forward. After finally locating him, federal agents arrested DeMonte during a traffic stop. He seemed genuinely surprised that it had finally been found. By all appearances, it seemed like DeMonte cleaned up his act during his life on the lam, but the law still expects people to answer for their past crimes, and it's only right to hold him accountable for the life he's accused of taking 15 years ago. Speaking with the Associated Press, criminal justice expert Kieran McConnell said it's unusual for someone to remain on the run for as long as DeMonte did. It's also not the norm for a fugitive to seamlessly assimilate into a new community. Following his arrest, DeMonte fought to avoid extradition to Canada. He finally gave up in early 2024 and decided that he'd willingly return to British Columbia, where he faces a first-degree murder charge. During an interview with Global News from Puerto Rican jail, he denied going on the run to avoid his legal charges, instead claiming that he'd fled to avoid certain threats to his life. The outcome of his case remains to be seen. 2. Dieter Krombach. 44-year-old Andre Bamberski was doing extremely well in 1982. 7 years after divorcing from his first wife and falling into a rut, the 44-year-old French accountant and single father was financially stable and finally in a new relationship. His entire life came crashing down in that same year when he learned through his ex-wife that his daughter Kalinka had died under suspicious circumstances in Germany. Kalinka was spending her summer vacation with her mother and stepfather, a well-respected doctor named Dieter Krombach, in the small town of Lindau. On what began as an ordinary July evening, Krombach called emergency services and said that he'd found Kalinka unresponsive. He told investigators that he'd injected the young woman with a tanning compound and given her a sleeping pill the night before, and that he'd also given Kalinka various injections to try reviving her before calling paramedics. An autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, and critical pieces of evidence on Kalinka's body mysteriously went missing, including what appeared to be someone else's biological fluid. Andre urged the authorities to continue investigating, but progress on the case was slow going. In the meantime, it became evident that Krombach's version of events did not align with the facts, and his stories were inconsistent. But no arrests were made, and Andre was essentially left to seek justice on his own. Andre believed that Krombach had killed Kalinka, and he only became more convinced of it based on the findings of his own investigation. The fact that Krombach had been suspected of poisoning one of his previous wives to death, but never charged with any crimes for it, only further solidified Andre's certainty about who had killed his daughter. Andre was very outspoken about his opinion of Krombach's guilt, and was even sued for distributing pamphlets accusing the doctor of murder. German prosecutors took the case to court in 1987, but were unable to prove any wrongdoing on Krombach's behalf. In 1995, Andre convinced a French court to try Krombach in absentia, but the guilty verdict and 15-year prison sentence were thrown out because the accused was not present in court to defend himself. The court was willing to pursue a case against Krombach if he returned to France, but until that happened, there was nothing they could do. Despite being failed by the justice system time and time again, Andre continued to fight for justice for Kalinka. He found himself at a crossroads during the early 2000s. Germany refused to extradite Krombach, and the statute of limitations on the case would run out in a few years, at which point it would be too late to hold anyone criminally responsible for Kalinka's murder. In 2009, Andre paid 3 men to kidnap Krombach in Germany and drive him across the border to France so that he'd be arrested and put on trial. The hired trio approached the 74-year-old doctor outside his home, beat him up, and drove to the city of Mulhouse, where they left him handcuffed to a fence outside a police station. Germany ordered France to return Krombach, but France refused. This time around, numerous women came forward with horror stories about being drugged and abused by Krombach. He was found guilty of causing intentional bodily harm resulting in unintentional death. It wasn't the murder conviction that Andre had hoped for, but it was enough to put Krombach away for 15 years. Krombach unsuccessfully appealed his case to the European Court of Human Rights, and in 2016 a court ordered his release due to health reasons. But prosecutors appealed the ruling and won, and Krombach remained behind bars until 2020. He died 7 months after his release, and it probably comforted Andre to know that his time in the free world was short-lived. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Michael Christian Green. On the day before Christmas Eve in 2023, 26-year-old police officer Michael Christian Green arrested a Hispanic man following a disturbance at a Sam's Club store in Pearl, Mississippi. Security footage would later prove that the arrestee, known only by his initials B.E., was repeatedly ignored when he asked to use the restroom. Left with no other choice, he eventually urinated in the corner of his holding cell. When Green noticed that the man had relieved himself on the floor, he erupted in a fit of rage. He threatened to beat B.E. and forced him to lick the urine up off the floor while recording the abuse with his cell phone. Terrified about what Green might do if he refused, the victim followed the cop's orders. He gagged several times, which is understandable considering the nature of what he was being ordered to do. But Green had no sympathy and told B.E. not to spit it out. After performing the despicable task to Green's satisfaction, the detainee repeatedly vomited into a garbage can. At the time, Green had been with the Pearl Police Department for about 6 months after working for several other law enforcement agencies in the region. He reportedly had some past personnel issues, but his disciplinary record was clean for the most part. His superiors certainly didn't think he'd ever do anything like this, and they were appalled when they found out about the incident. After all, there's simply no excuse for Green's behavior, and it's enough to make one wonder about what else he may have done to people that he managed to get away with. At the very least, he doesn't deserve to be a cop. An investigation was launched, and Green resigned from his job 3 days after B.E.'s arrest. The local police turned surveillance footage and other evidence over to the FBI, and the feds charged Green with depriving the victim of his civil rights while acting under the color of the law. He pleaded guilty to the charge and is scheduled to be sentenced in June of 2024. Green faces up to a year in federal prison and was ordered to surrender his state law enforcement certification. Hopefully, he'll never work in law enforcement again in Mississippi or elsewhere. Pearl Mayor Jake Windham conceded that this and other recent incidents of white officers assaulting and abusing non-white detainees paints the region in a negative light, understandably so. During a press conference, he wondered out loud how someone could treat another human being so terribly and reassured the public that this type of behavior will not be tolerated. He's also taken measures to prevent future abuses of power, including additional training and a review of the police department's procedures and policies.
9. Joseph Kennedy. Most people would agree that nobody deserves to die just for stealing. But in the mind of 67-year-old Joseph Lloyd Kennedy II from Okmulgee, Oklahoma, this severe punishment made perfect sense. He quickly became a suspect after the dismembered bodies of 4 men were discovered in a river near the scrapyard he owned back in 2022. Surveillance footage and cell phone location data put Kennedy at the location, where authorities believe the victims were killed, at the exact time they think the murders happened. Prosecutors revealed that there was also DNA evidence linking him to the crime. Perhaps the most damning argument against Kennedy, though, is his alleged confession to a friend that he shot the men because they were stealing from him. According to court documents, Kennedy said he simply lost it and started shooting before cutting the bodies up afterward. In a police interview earlier on in the case, the suspect admitted that he thought the victims were stealing, but claimed he had no contact with them. Kennedy was finally picked up by police in Florida for driving a stolen pickup truck and extradited back to Oklahoma. He now faces 4 counts of premeditated first-degree murder and is behind bars on a $10 million bond. 8. Crystal Sinclair. In 2016, a 29-year-old Florida woman named Crystal Sinclair was frustrated with how long it was taking to bring her alleged stalker to justice. One night, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office got word that Sinclair was on the way to 65-year-old John Casameno's home with a handgun and plans to confront him herself. Sheriff's deputies and officers with the DeLand Police Department started searching for Sinclair and stationed themselves outside Casameno's home. After a failed attempt at pulling her over, they used spike strips to stop her car. Sinclair allegedly spat on, swore at, and kicked her arresting officers. She was charged with fleeing and eluding police, battery on a law enforcement agent, resisting an officer with violence, as well as drug-related crimes. John Casameno told the Daytona Beach News Journal that he knew Sinclair but wasn't stalking her at all. Despite his claims, records revealed that he had been accused of stalking others in the past. He said that they met 4 months earlier when he sold her a boat, and that Sinclair had worked for his boat selling business for a short period. According to Casameno, his most recent contact with the woman happened weeks before her arrest, when he texted her to ask where he should drop off some of her belongings. It's unclear what the end result of this case was. Hopefully, whoever was at fault was punished. 7. Sali Haiz. In recent years, Lebanon has descended into a full-blown financial crisis, putting about 80% of its population below the poverty line and leaving many people hungry and in need of relief. Things have gotten so bad that some banks reportedly blocked locals from accessing their own money. Determined to get her hands on the $13,000 she had in a savings account, a woman named Sali Haiz and some friends held up a bank in Beirut towards the end of 2022. She briefly took everyone inside the bank hostage with what she later claimed was just a toy gun, then left with her hard-earned money. Around the same time, a man carried out a similar hold-up situation in the mountain city of Alais before turning himself into the police. A month earlier, another individual had to demand a bank withdrawal at gunpoint in order to get money from his account so he could pay for his sick father's medical treatment. Before going into hiding, Haiz claimed she went through with the heist for a similar reason: to help pay for her sister, who has cancer. She told the press that she had tried to withdraw money 2 days earlier. After several weeks on the run, Haiz surrendered. She was released on bail and hit with a 6-month travel ban while her case proceeded in court. Since then, the holdups haven't stopped, and unlike most crimes, they're being met with widespread public praise. After all, it's hard to have a problem with someone demanding what's rightfully theirs to take, especially when so many can relate to the suffering driving these people to such extreme measures. 6. Battered wife saves herself. A Louisiana housewife who went well out of her way to make her husband happy found herself in danger when he suddenly snapped one day in 2017. By then, the man had a history of verbally abusing his wife, but the woman never expected him to actually kick her, throw things at her, or pee on her like he did that fateful day. She said that her spouse got angry after she refused to back him up during a fight he picked at a local gas station. Things got ugly as soon as the couple got home. They went back to the station to discuss the fight, at which point the woman begged a man who was putting gas in his truck to drive her somewhere safe. When she saw her husband leave the gas station, she panicked, got into the truck, and drove it to the Baton Rouge Police Department herself. Her husband chased after her in his car. Outside the station, he got out of his vehicle and held onto the truck in an attempt to pull his wife out. In her desperation to get away from him, the woman smashed through the department's gate and kept driving until she saw an officer in the middle of a traffic stop. While she drove over to them, her husband fell off the truck and was fatally run over. Authorities decided not to charge the wife, who was left with both physical injuries and emotional trauma after the devastating ordeal. 5. Reese Davies and Tera McKenna. In early 2019, Reese Davies got into a fight of sorts with a man named Calum Holden and ended up with a stab wound. In a bid for revenge, Davies and his girlfriend, Tera McKenna, went after Holden and his lover, Jessica Williams, by chasing after them with a machete through the English village of Thornton Clevelys. The victims were getting out of their car when Davies and McKenna came up. Davies kicked the side view mirror and shouted that Holden was a dead man. Williams quickly sped off in the vehicle while Holden escaped to his mother's house on foot, where he called the police and told Williams to come home. When the young woman got out of the car, McKenna approached and threatened her again. As soon as Holden came out from inside his mom's house, Davies chased after him with the machete. In the meantime, McKenna started swinging at Williams with a makeshift weapon, a piece of wood with nails in it. They fell to the ground and began wrestling. McKenna and Davies both punched Williams in the head. Soon, bystanders noticed the scene and came over to help, causing the perpetrators to flee the scene. Davies and McKenna claimed the victims made the story up, but the court ruled otherwise. The judge imposed suspended sentences while cautioning the pair that they only narrowly avoided jail time. 4. Roger and Anthony Belo. In early 2020, 39-year-old Jacob Sansom and his uncle, 57-year-old Maurice Cardinal, were out moose hunting in Glendon, Alberta, Canada, when they briefly pulled into the driveway of a home where Roger Belo and his son Joseph lived. Concerned that the truck was being driven by thieves who wanted to rob them, Roger and Joseph got into their own car and chased after it, reaching nearly 100 miles an hour, 161 kilometers per hour during the chase. In the middle of the pursuit, Roger called his elder son, Anthony, who lived next door, and instructed him to bring over a gun. Roger pulled in front of the truck he was after and stopped, forcing the pickup to stop as well. Surveillance footage later showed that the interactions between the two parties lasted less than 30 seconds before Anthony shot Cardinal and Sansom, who died on the road. When questioned by investigators, the Belodos denied having any knowledge or involvement in the shooting. After discovering contrary evidence, authorities charged Roger and Anthony with murder. The men argued in court that they acted in self-defense, but the prosecution maintained that Cardinal and Sansom were the ones who had to defend themselves from danger. Anthony was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 13 years, and Roger is serving a 10-year sentence for manslaughter. 3. Matthew Golden. Early one morning in 2018, authorities in Iowa put out an Amber Alert for 2 missing children in a silver Hyundai Sonata with Illinois license plates. While driving down Interstate 80, a driver named Matthew Golden spotted a white van with Florida plates and somehow mistook it for the Amber Alert vehicle. Instead of reporting the sighting to the police and trailing the vehicle from a safe distance, which is what people should do in response to Amber Alerts, Golden allegedly rammed the white van repeatedly. According to law enforcement, Golden then approached the van with his personal gun and ordered commands before shooting at the vehicle twice. He soon learned how big of a mistake he made. The driver of the van was a Florida resident named T.C. Smith, who was simply on his way to visit family in Illinois. Altoona Police Chief Greg Stallman told local station WHO 13 that nothing about Golden's response to the alert was correct or justified. Inside his vehicle, officers found 2 more handguns, as well as some marijuana. Golden reportedly stripped down to his underwear before his arrest, but police aren't sure why. They concluded that he was not under the influence at the time. He was charged with possessing an illegal substance, intimidation, and 2 counts of assault. 2. Billy McGillicuty. In recent years, community members in the Canadian village of McAdam have faced rising issues with vandalism, thefts, and other property crimes. Residents became so frustrated that when 41-year-old Billy McGillicuty took the problem into his own hands and got arrested, dozens of people went to court in his support, including the village's mayor. The incident happened in June 2022, when McGillicuty approached an alleged meth dealer named Blake Scott at his friend's house and hit the man with a metal bat. McGillicuty apparently suspected Scott of being responsible for some of the recent crimes in the area, and he also accused the man of inappropriately looking at his daughter. Scott later told police that he wanted to clear up the misunderstanding. So he contacted a mutual friend of his and McGillicuty's named Dwayne Gardner, who invited him over that day. When Scott arrived, he was ordered to sit in a chair, and Gardner allegedly pointed a sawed-off shotgun at him. McGillicuty then came and roughed Scott up, throwing him to the ground and kneeing him before assaulting him with a chair. He told Scott to strip naked and get into the back of his truck. After taking his clothes off, Scott decided to make a run for it and went to a neighbor who called the police. Police charged McGillicuty in connection with the incident, and the community was quick to rally around him, believing he was left with no choice but to take matters into his own hands. Scott admitted that he had previously served time for breaking and entering, but that it was in his past. He said he wasn't doing anything wrong leading up to the encounter with McGillicuty. He also insisted that he had simply nodded hello to McGillicuty's daughter while walking along a path, but that he was just being polite and didn't say or do anything overly inappropriate. The court sentenced McGillicuty to 18 months in jail for unlawful confinement and assault with a weapon. And talks with local leaders and law enforcement about how to get crime under control are reportedly still happening. 1. Jack Martinelli and Christopher Azar. In 2014, when a group of friends saw a man punch a woman in Melbourne, Australia early one morning, they immediately went to check on her before moving her out of the street. They went after her alleged attacker, Ashley Rafati, and what started as a verbal confrontation quickly escalated to physical blows. Rafati swung and missed Jack Martinelli, who punched him back, knocking him to the ground. Martinelli's friend, Christopher Azar, then kicked Rafati after he fell. The beating continued, with Martinelli and Azar apparently unaware Rafati had lost consciousness. He survived but was left hard of hearing with a lengthy recovery period, so police arrested the suspects. In court, Martinelli's lawyer insisted his client was deeply sorry for what he described as a bad error of judgment in an emotionally charged environment. The attorney also pointed out how Martinelli apologized to Rafati without blaming alcohol for his behavior, like people have been known to do after these types of encounters in the past. Azar also expressed remorse for his behavior. The judge acknowledged that Rafati threw the first punch, but the defendant's reaction to it was beyond unacceptable. She also mentioned how Martinelli and Azar would have likely been hailed as heroes for helping the young woman, if only they hadn't gone on to commit a brutal assault. The men managed to avoid convictions, on the contingency of staying out of legal trouble for 2 years, paying fines, and going to a positive lifestyle course.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather have something really good happen in your life at a time when you feel like your hard work and effort are getting you nowhere? Or would you prefer to see someone who wronged you experience a dose of well-deserved misfortune at a time when it seems like they never suffer for being a terrible person? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.